All right, hello everyone. Welcome to our fourth day of virtual luncheon series on the JFK assassination. First time to do it virtually this year because of COVID virus, and it's gone very well. Many of you have been here all week. Many of you have seen several presentations, and some of you are just coming in for the first time today. So really appreciate it. As a quick recap, on Monday we did the basics of the assassination with also covering various conspiracy theories. Then on Tuesday was really interesting. We had Dr. Cyril Wecht, who's 89 years old and sharp as a tack, and has been doing JFK assassination research and testimony for as long as the Warren Commission's kind of been around. So that was terrific. I hope you really enjoyed that. That was not only nice for people to learn something, but also see a piece of history. On Wednesday, we really packed it in with a long day. We had Chris Fulton with his story about the inheritance and what he calls the poison fruit of the Kennedy assassination and how it affected him. For many of you, that's first time you've heard that. Its book's only been out a few years. We're working on a possible movie with Chris. It's a pretty tough thing to swallow and appreciate what went on. And then we also had Dick Russell yesterday talk about Richard K. Snagel, the man who came into an El Paso bank, shot his pistol up in the air. He was supposed to kill Oswald. He didn't, and he wanted to be in jail, so he didn't get himself into an issue. Dick Russell also talked about many other things that he did, and I learned a little bit more about Dick yesterday. Dick's been an investigative reporter, freelance, and worked on the JFK assassination on and off for the last 50 years as well. Today we have a nice treat. I'm going to go through something really quick that I want to show you, and then we're going to start on with Jacob Hornberger. But I wanted to go through something as fast as I can here. Short presentation on, remember I talked to you on Monday, and on Monday I said, there are some things that all you got to do is just prove there's another bullet or another shooter, and it blows a Warren Commission kind of right out. And we talked about that on Monday. So I'm just going to show you, and there's at least 15 or so things that you can focus on that do that. So one of the things I wanted to focus on today, just to give you an idea, this is a quote, by the way, from Congressman Hale Boggs. If you remember, he's from Louisiana, was on the Warren Commission, and died in a mysterious plane crash, after he got very coincidentally suspicious about the Warren Commission. This is a quote from him about Hoover lying his eyes out to the commission on Oswald, Ruby, their friends, their bullets, the guns, you name it. Pretty compelling. So remember, we spent a lot of time with Cyril Wecht, and I spent some on Monday talking about the magic bullet, right? And how the Warren Commission had a problem with these 3 bullets, and the first bullet missed. The second bullet had to cause all the injuries because the third bullet hit JFK in the head. So this was the path of the second bullet. Very important that you follow this today, because what I'm going to show you and then what Jacob shows you is very important in refuting kind of what happened at the Warren Commission, because they based the whole thing on this for a lone assassin. If this blows up, then there's not a lone assassin. Then you, by definition, have multiple people involved, and then you have a conspiracy to kill the president. So just as a quick reminder, that's that. And again, they say the first shot hit Kennedy, or missed actually, and hit James Tague. And then the second shot, went through his back, out his throat, into Governor Connolly, and caused all the damage with him. And the third shot would have blown his head up. So let's talk a little bit about that. And we went through this on Tuesday with Dr. Wecht. So there's all kinds of testimony to frontal gunshots that showed up. But one thing I want to focus on, I showed you this on Monday, There's all kinds of bullet evidence, but focus on number 1 here on the overpass coming from the front, or possibly 2, which I talked to you about, Tosh Plumley being a witness, and a lot of work on ballistics by Sherry Feister coming over here on the right. This will be shot number 2 that will come from the front, okay? So one of these 2 places created this. This is the evidence I want to show you today. This is the windshield, and that should look like a bullet hole to you. Now, there's also this shot, which is a shot into the front dash, but I'm just focusing on the windshield today. And here you might go, well, I can't see anything in the windshield, but yes, you can. See this antenna on the back when we used to have antennas on cars, and you can see that windshield right there. See that hole? See that white spot? Let me blow it up. You see it now? See that? So here it is in the window. President Kennedy's already been shot. Secret Serviceman Clint Hale's already jumped on the back. And then here is the limousine at Parkland Hospital. You're, wow, well, maybe we can blow that up. So let's see if we can. Yep, we sure can. And look what we have here. There's the hole again. And there it is again, blown up. So we also have eyewitnesses that testify. Valia Glanges, a medical student, talks about, hey, the hole was very clear, through and through bullet hole. I saw it through the windshield of the car from front to back. No, there's no way any cracks associated with that bullet hole. It's a very high velocity bullet, which, by the way, remember, a Mannlicher Carcano cannot fire a high velocity bullet. Now, why would she say that? She actually was a gun expert, and she shot guns all the way until she was an old lady. She loved to go to the shooting range and gun range and shoot guns. George Whitaker at the Ford Motor Company, when the limousine was brought back to be repaired, he wrote this down, and he kept a little diary on this because he thought it was highly suspicious that they not only had to fix up the limousine and replace the glass because it was all evidence, and so he kept a little notebook and diary on that, much to his danger, and it was all revealed much later. Other evidence from a Dallas motorcycle patrolman about a hole in the front windshield, as well as from H.R. Freeman. I was right beside it. I could have touched it. It was a bullet hole. All kinds of evidence here, Secret Service as well, St. Louis Dispatch reporters. And this is where Algren's was when he took that photograph that I showed you from the front, or which I'm about to show you, which is this one. Okay, remember this photograph? So the first shot's already been done. Here is Kennedy here. Here's his arms have already come up. And remember Dr. Weck talking about Governor Connolly turning around. This is Jackie's white glove. So, all right, so see this instant. Now see this little white spot here? This is what we think is a bullet hole and caused probably the gunshot wound to the throat, because his head is not exploded here. So it'd have to be a different bullet. So when you look here, you match this up to the Zapruder film. This is the same instant in time. Here's Kennedy's arms up. Here's her white glove holding his arm. Here's Governor Connolly turned around. I'm going to go back. See that? Governor Connolly, president, her white glove. This is the same instant in time, and it's really neat, I guess, in some ways, to see this same instant in time and what's going on. So let's blow that up a little bit. Here's the white. It looks like a little hurricane spot where a bullet went through. And here is the negative of it. And so see, Jackie's white glove is now black. Everything's different. And I thought that was just a neat way to look at it, because now here's the black spot on the windshield where that happened. Let me blow it up. Here is Jackie's white glove. Here is the little black hurricane dot through the windshield by the rear view mirror. And then also here are news articles, Southeast Missouriman, Lewis and Morning Tribune on December 3rd, December 4th, both talking about the limousine and how there was a hole in the windshield. And as well as here's one in the press from December 3rd, limousine hole in the windshield. So I just kind of wanted to show you that to you as just one little thing that you can do in research, all kinds of examples of how to go. Because once we prove there's a frontal windshield shot, then the whole Warren Commission thing blows up and we've got a problem. We got to throw it out and we got to start over. Now, having said that, now Grant, hopefully you've made Jacob a panelist on here because I don't see him on here yet. Please admit him. And I'd like to introduce him. Jacob is a founder and president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, a libertarian educational foundation based in Fairfax, Virginia. He received his BA in economics from Virginia Military Institute and his law degree from the University of Texas. He was a trial attorney for 12 years in Texas. He also was an adjunct professor at the University of Dallas, where he taught law and economics. In 1987, Mr. Hornberger left the practice of law to become director of the programs at the Foundation for Economic Education in New York. He founded FFF in 1989. His books on the JFK assassination are The Kennedy Autopsy, The Kennedy Autopsy 2, Regime Change, The JFK Assassination, and The Evil of the National Security State. He's done tremendous work capitalizing on some of the work done from the ARRB and the findings there, but he put it together in a real simple. He's an excellent communicator, and I've met him before through Dennis McQuestion, a friend of the firm, and I'm just honored to have you here today, Jacob. I hope Grant has added you as a panelist because I'm not sure I still see you yet, but if you, yeah, there you are. Okay, so you can go ahead and unmute and put your video on, and we're ready for you to start, and I think you can screen share whenever you're ready.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dory. It's an honor and a pleasure to be with you and good to see you again. It's been a couple of years and it's nice to be here with your viewers. And thank you for allowing me to share some perspectives on this horrific event in November of 1963. As y'all know, there's a lot of different theories as to who killed Kennedy. There's the mafia did it, the Soviets did it, the Cubans did it, the Lee Harvey Oswald did it, space aliens did it. There's all kinds of theories. But throughout all of this controversy, there is one indisputable fact, one incontrovertible fact that everyone agrees on. And it is that incontrovertible fact that inexorably leads us to realize who orchestrated and carried out this assassination. That fact is that the US military conducted the autopsy on the body of President Kennedy. Nobody disputes that, and everybody agrees with it. And as we go through this talk, you'll see that that leads us to understanding how and why this assassination was carried out. Now, if we go back to the evening of November 22nd, 1963, just a few hours after the assassination, or let's even go back further than that. Let's go to Parkland Hospital. Right after the president's declared dead, the Dallas County medical examiner, Dr. Earl Rose, announces that he's going to conduct an autopsy on the president's body. Now, what's an autopsy? Simply a medical examination of a body that by an established physician, a forensics pathologist, to establish the cause of death. In gunshot wounds, there's studies as to the trajectory of the bullets, how many bullets, and so forth. And the pathologist will come up with the conclusion, this is what caused this person's death. In courtroom scenes, it's often referred to the autopsy as the best evidence of what happened. Well, at the moment that Dr. Earl Rose announces that he's going to do this autopsy, which he was required to do under Texas law, keep in mind that this was just a straight murder case under Texas law. There was no federal offense involved here. It wasn't a federal offense to kill the president at that time. So it was just a straight murder case. And under Texas state law, the Texas medical examiner has to conduct an autopsy in a murder case. At that moment, a team of Secret Service agents led by a man named Roy Kellerman, who interestingly had been the passenger in the limousine in which the president had been traveling when he was shot, announced in a very loud voice that his team of Secret Service agents were not going to permit this autopsy to be conducted. And there was a bunch of screaming, yelling. Rose stood in front of the casket that had been brought over, a beautiful, expensive, ornate casket, and said, "You're not leaving this hospital until I conduct this autopsy." And the team of Secret Service agents said, "We're operating under orders." Get out of our way. There was profanity, screaming. It was a huge brouhaha. Hospital personnel said that they were scared to death. They didn't know what was going to happen. And because it was an impasse, Rose wasn't budging. And at that moment, Kellerman and his team of Secret Service agents, and let me show you a picture of Kellerman there. That's Roy Kellerman. Kellerman announces in a very loud voice. Well, Kellerman then pulls back, as did the rest of his team, their coat jackets. And
hey, Jacob, are you using a picture or presentation?
Oh yeah, I didn't click share.
Yeah, you
I
have
guess.
to share screen.
Yeah, let me see where that is. Well, it was there yesterday when we tested this. I don't see it now though. Speaker recording. Okay, we may have a problem. Yesterday there was a button here.
Yeah, they kind of move around depending on what computer you're using. It should be on the same menu bar where you have the mute and the start video. There should be a share screen button somewhere.
Okay. All right. Now, are you seeing, oh, share. All right. Are you seeing Kellerman now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's Roy Kellerman. Kellerman pulls back his coat jacket, as did the rest of the team, and brandished guns. So it was clear that they were prepared to use deadly force to get that body out of there and prevent Rose from conducting this autopsy. And they succeeded in doing that. At that point, Rose decided that discretion was the better part of valor, steps aside. They take the casket out to Dallas Love Field, where, interestingly enough, the new president, Lyndon Johnson, is waiting for it. Now, it's not real clear as to who issued the order to Kellerman, but it's a virtual certainty that it had to be Johnson, because Johnson was there at the hospital until the moment that President Kennedy was declared dead. Then he gets in a car to head to Love Field. And when he gets to Love Field, he begins transferring all his luggage and other stuff from Air Force Two to Air Force One and removing seats in the back of Air Force One to make room for the casket. With the virtual certainty, he issued the order. Now, when he was at Parkland, Johnson alluded to the possibility that this assassination could be the first strike in a nuclear attack by the Soviet Union. Keep in mind that the Cuban Missile Crisis had happened the year before. The Cold War was still at its height. There was continuous tensions between the Soviet Union and the US. So Johnson was expressing this concern that, hey, they may be attacking us, and this is a first step in that. On his way to Dallas Love Field, he scrunches down in his seat and says, you know, we could come under ambush here by the Soviets. I better scrunch down here and hide. But interestingly enough, when he gets to Love Field, his actions belie any such concern, because he takes the time to remove the seats in anticipation of the casket that he knows is coming. And he takes the time to look for a federal judge to swear him in, even though Bobby Kennedy, the attorney general, had told him on the telephone, you don't need to be sworn in. You're automatically the president. So Johnson's actions were not of a president that was very concerned, after all, with the possibility that this could be the Soviets, because obviously if there existed even such a possibility, Johnson would have gotten up into the air immediately in order to direct America's defenses. Because if they're going to kill the president, they're obviously going to target the vice president, either with a shooting or with a nuclear missile fired into Dallas. And so Johnson takes the time to have this body delivered, and of course the luggage transfer, which he didn't have to do. Air Force Two was the exact replica of duplicate of Air Force One. So in any event, the body is delivered there, and in this beautiful casket, it's then flown to Andrews Air Force Base on Air Force One with Johnson. And there, the casket is taken off the plane and placed into a Navy vessel with Jacqueline Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy in that vehicle, and it slowly starts making its way out to the Bethesda morgue, where that was about 6 p.m. Eastern time, where at around 8 p.m., the body is introduced in this Dallas casket in an official way into the Bethesda morgue for the the autopsy. Now here's Johnson getting sworn in by Judge Sarah Hughes. And now, when the body, let's now jump to the mid 1970s. The House Select Committee on Assassinations has been convened. People have heard about the Warren report. Some of them have read it. They understand it. It detailed that Kennedy had been assassinated by a lone nut ex-Marine with no apparent motive, that had just discovered that he was going to be on the parade route because he worked at the Texas School Book Depository. And he said, hey, I can kill a president here. And so he goes ahead and the official version is that he kills the president. And it's just a straight, simple murder case, lone nut. Well, people bought it at first, but then as people started thinking about it, they thought, this doesn't make any sense. There was too many anomalies, too many contradictions. And then people started raising all kinds of challenges and questions and contradictions. So in response to this, the House Select Committee on Assassinations is convened in the 1970s, mid 1970s. And at the close of those proceedings, a group of enlisted men came forward to the press and told a remarkable story. They said that on the evening of the assassination, they had carried in the president's body, not in the big, expensive, ornate casket from Dallas into which the body had been placed, but in a cheap military-style shipping casket, the kind of shipping caskets that were used in the Vietnam War for troops that were killed over there. They said they carried the body in at 6:35 p.m., which was almost an hour and a half before the official introduction of the body at 8 p.m. They said that they had been sworn to secrecy about this on the right after the autopsy, like on the Monday or Tuesday after the autopsy. They said that they had been warned that if they ever talked, that they would be court-martialed, and if they weren't in the military, they would be criminally prosecuted in federal court. They said they put the fear of God in us, that this was a highly classified operation and that we essentially were going to take this secret to the grave with us. Well, the House Select Committee starts releasing people from these vows of secrecy, and that's when the story starts coming out. Now, if we jump ahead to the Assassination Records Review Board in the 1990s, we find verification of this. Now, the Assassination Records Review Board, if I can be permitted to digress a moment, is the board that was brought into existence to mandate the official release of all JFK-related records from the Pentagon, the CIA, the FBI, the Secret Service, and all federal agencies. Interestingly enough, that even though the official report was that this assassination had been carried out by a lone nut assassin, the entire investigation, the whole episode, had been shrouded from the very beginning in national security, which obviously made no sense. What does a lone nut assassin that just happens to be working in a book depository have to do with national security? And yet much of the Warren proceedings were classified. They were kept secret. They were held in secret. A lot of the records were kept secret, assassination-related records. So in 1991, Oliver Stone comes out with his movie JFK. Highly controversial, stirs up the mainstream press. They go on the attack because Stone's thesis is that this is a bunch of bull. This was no lone nut assassin. This is ridiculous. That this was a national security state regime change operation. That the national security state decided, just as they had decided in other countries that where the prime minister or the president posed a threat to national security, like in 1953 in Iran or 1954 in Guatemala, that the president of the United States, John Kennedy, because of what he was doing, posed a much graver threat to national security than any foreign official that they had ousted and replaced with somebody more to their liking. So at the end of that movie, there's a little blurb that says they're still keeping their records secret. The Pentagon, the CIA, the FBI, the Secret Service, and other federal agencies, because they say national security depends on this. Well, this created such an outcry among the general public who had seen the movie that they started writing Congress saying, this is ridiculous, release these records. And at that time, Clinton was running against Bush, and Clinton comes out and says, I'm in favor of releasing the records. And so Bush, George H.W. Bush had been director of the CIA, was sort of put in an awkward position. And he said, okay, well, I'll sign such a law. So they enact the JFK Records Act that mandates the release of all JFK related records. Interestingly enough, somebody slips a provision into this law that says, okay, while you have to release your records, the ARRB, which is the board that's going to enforce this thing, is not going to be permitted to investigate anything they find. And it was a mandate that was strictly enforced by the board of directors of the Assassination Records Review Board, that if they told any staff member, if you investigate anything you find, you will be fired. And so everybody had to be very careful not to investigate anything. But by the same token, they came up with some very interesting, revealing things that had been kept secret for 30 years. And many things that I think most Americans don't realize and that we're going to talk about today. You're seeing before you the report from a sergeant, Marine sergeant named Roger Boyajian, who had been kept secret by the military from the Warren Commission, the House Select Committee, and here the ARR, and from the ARRB. The ARB discovers his existence. And he tells another remarkable story. He says, I was in charge of the Marine team that carried this cheap shipping casket contained the president's body in at 6:35 p.m. And you can see there at approximately 1700 hours, 22 November, a detail of 10 men was sent to the Bethesda Naval Hospital. The detail arrived at approximately 1800, 6 o'clock. And then there, number 3, at approximately 1835, which 6:35, the casket was received at the morgue entrance and taken inside. Well, it turns out that Boyajian had kept a copy of this report. This report had not been turned over by the military, had never been disclosed by the military. And he had kept a copy of it, and he gave this to the ARRB. And it was dated November 26. It was a copy of a contemporaneous report, which verified that what those enlisted men had been saying in the 1970s was true. Now, in the late 1970s, there was a criminal case that a district attorney in New Orleans named Jim Garrison brought against a man named Clay Shaw, alleging that Shaw was part of this national security state regime change operation. And in fact, the movie JFK was modeled after the book that Jim Garrison wrote about that particular trial. And at that trial, a Colonel Fink, who was one of the 3 autopsy physicians, testified. And Fink was asked, how did you get involved in this? And he says, oh, well, at 8 p.m. on the evening of the assassination, Commander James Humes, one of the other 3 autopsy physicians, telephoned him and said, hey, we want you to come and help us out, because Humes was not a forensics pathologist. He was just a pathologist. But Fink was a forensic pathologist. And Humes testified that Humes told him at 8 p.m., we already have x-rays of the president's head. Now, keep in mind that 8 p.m. was the official introduction of the body in the Dallas casket from the vehicle in which Bobby Kennedy and Mrs. Kennedy had been traveling. So the question naturally arises, how could they have x-rays of the president's head if that was the first time, 8 p.m., the same time that he was calling Fink, how could those x-rays exist? So again, a slip up, but verifying that the body had been brought in at 6:35 p.m. earlier. And in fact, one of the x-ray technicians later testified at the ARRB that when he was carrying the x-rays up to the x-ray development room, he saw Mrs. Kennedy coming in, which into the morgue, or the naval facility, which obviously indicates that they already had the body in their possession earlier, because the vehicle containing the Dallas casket, which obviously was empty at this point, unbeknownst to Mrs. Kennedy or Bobby Kennedy, was still sitting out front of the Bethesda Naval Hospital. Now, what's going on here? What's happening? What are they doing in there for that hour and a half? Well, to answer that question, we need to go back to Parkland Hospital. Now, Immediately after the president was declared dead and the body had been taken away, two of the treating physicians at Parkland held a press conference. And they, at that press conference, now keep in mind, these are not pathologists, they're treating physicians, but they said that the bullet wound in the neck, the president suffered two wounds, one to the head and one to the neck. The one to the neck, they said, probably was not fatal. And they said that it was an entry wound right here in the front of the neck. And they didn't do a dissection of the neck or anything like a pathologist would do. But those of you that are familiar with Parkland Hospital know that this is one of the premier trauma hospitals in the country. I mean, if you're going to get shot by a gun, Parkland is the place to be taken to. I mean, this is what they specialize in. And so they could recognize what an entry site of a bullet looks like. And they said, well, from what they saw, this was an entry wound. They also testified, well, they all stated immediately after the president was declared dead and at this press conference, all the treating physicians verified at that time that the president had a huge hole in the back of his head. Now, like it was an orange size hole. Okay, now why is that important? Well, because a big wound like that, orange size, denotes an exit wound. Because when a bullet enters the head from the front, let's say, it enters the size of a bullet. But as it's proceeding through the head, it's pushing brain mass in front of it so that when it reaches the other side of the skull, it blows out into a big hole. And so that's how you know it's an exit wound. Now, one of the treating physicians there was a man named Dr. McClelland. I forget his first name. But McClelland turned out to be one of the premier treating physicians at Parkland. He had a illustrious career. He just passed away about a year ago. And throughout his life, he said that hole there, that what happened was that he was brought to the front of the gurney. When he got to the treating room, the autopsy room, there were already some physicians there, and they directed him to the head of the gurney where the president's head was. And we're getting ready to do a tracheotomy, and McClellan was going to help with the tracheotomy. But then he noticed the back of the president's head had this huge hole. And he knew at that moment that this man was dead. I mean, he wasn't technically dead. He was still alive, but there is no way that somebody can survive a wound like that. So any treatment was futile. And he called everybody over. He says, have you all seen this? And well, they had not seen it. And they raise up the back of the head, and there's this huge wound in what's called the occipital region of the skull, the lower right section. They saw cerebellum leaking out, which is the lower part of the brain. And they knew that was it. It was over. Now, they went through the motions, like they were, do whatever they could to save, but it was just, rather than just standing around, like they did the tracheotomy, but it was just a matter of time. Now, let me show you. McClellan did lots of interviews that are online that you can check. This is just one of them. Listen to what he says.
We can't hear him.
You can't hear that?
No, sir.
Okay.
I had the same problem the other day. I was trying to play YouTube on Zoom, and it didn't work.
Okay. Well, what he's saying there is that he was at the head of the gurney, and he looked down at the back of the president's head, what I just said, and there's this huge, massive hole in which he then summons the other treating physicians. So now, if we go to this website, here is Audrey Bell. She was one of the treating nurses. She drew this for the ARRB. This is in the 1990s. And that circle there denotes where she remembers that big orange size hole. All right. Diana Boren, she draws the circle right there independently. They weren't in the room at the same time. She was helping get President Kennedy out of the vehicle when they brought him over to Parkland. Kemp Clark says it's in the occipital region of the skull. That's the rear of the skull, lower rear. Here's Dr. Carrico. He says there was quite a large defect about here, pointing on the back of his skull. Dr. Charles Crenshaw, who wrote one, maybe two great books, I highly recommend. He said that there's his drawing of the hole in the back of the head. This is Dr. McClellan's drawing. This is Dr. Grossman's drawing. This is Dr. McClellan again, pointing to the back of his head, the hole there in the back of his head. This is Dr. Paul Peters right there, occipital parietal. Here's the guy that was driving the ambulance that had the big Dallas casket in it. You could feel the sharp edges of the bone at the edge of the skull in the back of his head. Clint Hill, who was on the back of the limousine and pushed Jacqueline Kennedy back into the vehicle. He was looking at this wound for the few minutes it took to get to Parkland. He later testified about that, the big wound in the back of the head. Here's some drawings. The one on the left is by one of the morticians in Washington, actually Maryland. That's Tom Robinson. He has a circle there for the back of the head. Right here on the right is, or in the middle, is a drawing by an FBI agent, James Sibbert, showing where he remembers the hole was. Now, what's the problem here? Well, here's the problem. This is the official autopsy photograph of the back of President Kennedy's head. Now, do you see any massive orange-sized wound there? No, there's no big size wound there. And because you see, the orange-sized wound denoting or connoting an exit wound obviously doesn't fit with the official scenario because Lee Harvey Oswald is in the rear. And so here you have a shot coming in from the front with a big, massive orange-sized hole in the back. Well, that doesn't fit the official scenario unless Kennedy was turning around facing the school book depository, which he never was. So their claim, the official claim, is that Kennedy got hit with the bullet from the rear and that little white spot there. They said, well, that could have been it. They never could decide where the hole was, the supposed bullet entry wound. Later, they said it was there in the top of the head, and then they moved it down, then they moved it up further. So they never really settled on where their so-called entry wound went. But you can see the problem here now. Okay, now, if we go back to in the 1990s, the ARRB, they discovered the existence of a woman named Sandra Spencer. Now, Spencer is, at November of '63, the petty officer in charge of the White House laboratory at the Naval Photographic Center in Washington. She has a top secret security clearance. She's in charge of the lab. She works closely with Kennedy, with Mrs. Kennedy, both on classified photographs, developing photographs, informal photographs like when they take pictures of their children and so forth in the family. No one has ever questioned the credibility, the veracity, the professionalism of this woman. First class Navy personnel. She is summoned to testify before the ARRB, and she tells another remarkable story. She says on the weekend of the assassination, she was asked to develop the autopsy photographs of President Kennedy. And on a top secret classified basis, she had kept this secret for 30 years, or more than 30 years. I mean, everybody in the military, everybody in the government knows that when you have classified information, you keep it secret even after you leave the military. You can't ever disclose it. You take it to the grave with you. For 30 years, she had kept this secret, as a good military personnel would do. Well, the ARRB releases her from her vow of secrecy, and she said that she developed these photographs. And so they show her the official photographs in the record, including this one right there. And she carefully examines them. And she says, no, sir, those are not the photographs that I developed on the weekend of the assassination. The photographs I developed showed a big, massive wound, like an exit-sized wound in the back of the president's head, which confirmed what all the treating physicians had said at the time of right after the president was declared dead, and all the other witnesses, along with the fact that they found a piece of the skull. A medical student found a piece of a skull in the grass the very next day. And he took it to his uncle, who happened to be a pathologist there at a hospital in Dallas. And that pathologist took pictures of it and determined, along with his team, that this was from the occipital part of the brain, of the skull, which of course then confirmed the same thing, that there was this massive exercise wound. There were also people that got splattered by brain material in the back of the limousine, indicating that there had been a blowout in that direction. So here you have Sandra Spencer saying, essentially, you've got two separate sets of photographs here, one deceptive and one correct. Now, how do they reconcile this? You see, now the ARB couldn't investigate this. They were prohibited. Remember, somebody had slipped a provision in the law. All they could do was get documents released. Now, somebody also slipped a provision in the law that said, well, you've got 25 years to do your releasing, because the CIA and the military and Secret Service were saying, oh, national security is at stake if we release our records 25, 30 years after the assassination, which patently ridiculous. I mean, what do they mean, national security? Like what, the Soviets are going to attack? It's ridiculous. The Cold War was even over by that time. You know, the U.S. is going to fall into the ocean. It was ludicrous. But somebody slipped the provision, you got 25 years. So while they got a lot of things released, like Sandra Spencer's testimony, they still had 25 years, which expired in the first year of Donald Trump's regime. So Trump said, well, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and release them. And the National Archives was getting ready. We're talking about like 15,000 records. And the CIA at the last moment told Trump, this is going to jeopardize national security if you release these things. This is in 2016 and or 2017. And so Trump goes along with them and extends the time for secrecy till October 2021, which of course means Biden. And there's no question the CIA is going to ask for another extension and Biden's going to grant it. But it's incriminating the fact that they have to keep these records secret, but you can understand why when you see all the things that have come out, especially ARRB. Now, you've heard a lot of controversy about the president's brain. What happened to the brain? What happened to the brain? Well, it's actually irrelevant. The real controversy of the brain, which the mainstream press touched on, but never really delved into, remarkably so, is the fact that there were two separate brain examinations. Now, in an autopsy, you usually just have one brain exam. There's no reason to have two. And the autopsy physicians were saying that there was only one. That's what they told the Warren Commission, the House Select Committee, the ARRB. But the ARRB's general counsel, Jeremy Gunn, and one of his staff members, Douglas Horn, discovered that it wasn't true. And the reason the way they discovered this is that they had the testimony of two different groups of people, some overlap at the two different brain exams. And so that's how they knew that there were two separate brain exams, because one person was saying, well, I was there. And another person was saying, I was there. And both of them confirmed that the other was not there. But there was overlap with respect to the autopsy physicians. Well, at the first one, the brain was sectioned, and this was verified by the official autopsy photographer. Now, sectioned means you cut it like a loaf of bread. And after you do that to look at trajectory of the bullet, and you look at bullet fragments and so forth, and you remove fragments, but a brain can't reconstitute itself. Well, at the second brain exam, which is depicted here in this drawing of the brain, which that's a rendition of the brain of the supposed real brain. There's no section. It's an intact brain. Now it's damaged, but there's no sectioning here, which obviously indicates that this is not the brain of the president. Now, keep in mind that Bethesda is a teaching hospital. They have plenty of specimens there, brains, hearts, and kidneys, and so forth. Wouldn't have been difficult to get a brain and produce whatever damage they needed, but clearly this isn't the section of brain. Now, what then is going on here? Well, in order to understand what happens here, because you've got now a fraudulent autopsy. There is no way to reconcile a fraudulent autopsy with an innocent explanation. It's impossible. That the autopsy then leads us to understand who conducted this assassination, because these things don't get planned just at the last minute. Hey, let's have a fraudulent autopsy. We're talking about just a few hours after the assassination. You know, who's going to come up with that idea and say, hey, why don't we have a fraudulent autopsy here? So clearly this thing takes planning. And in fact, Colonel Fink at the Clay Shaw trial said, in response to the prosecutor's question, why didn't you dissect the neck? And Fink hems and haws and hems and haws. And so the prosecutor says, well, okay, that's all fine and good, Colonel Fink, but why didn't you dissect the neck? And Fink hems and haws and hems and haws. And finally, the prosecutor turns to the judge and says, Your Honor, he's not answering the question. Would you please order him to answer the question? And he says, Colonel Fink, answer the question directly. And Fink was trapped. And so Fink says, I was ordered not to. And he says, well, who ordered you? And he said, oh, I don't remember. But you see, clearly what's happening here is that there's a deeper state force that's orchestrating events here and guiding events, directing events. Because ordinarily at an autopsy, it's the physicians who are in charge. Now, why then would the national security state engage in a cover-up? More important, why would they engage in this assassination that they then covered up with a fraudulent autopsy? Well, this goes back to the concept of regime change and the Cold War, where the national security establishment, which had been brought into existence after World War II, the federal government was converted to a national security state. Well, giant military, giant intelligence apparatus to fight the Soviet national security state. Well, at this point, the military, the CIA believes that the communists are coming to get us. They're coming to get us from Cuba. They're coming to get us from the Soviet Union, China, that this is a life or death struggle. And so you've got, here's Mohammad Mossadegh, the prime minister of Iran. They oust in a regime change operation, 1953, democratically elected. There is Akobo Arbenz. I don't know why that one's not popping up, but he was the democratically elected president of Guatemala. They ousted him in a regime change operation. They targeted him with assassination. There was Fidel Castro, of course, that they repeatedly tried to assassinate because he was supposedly a threat to U.S. national security. There was Salvador Allende, 10 years after the assassination, which is very revealing. He was the democratically elected president of Chile, and the U.S. national security establishment convinced the Chilean national security establishment, you have a duty to oust your president because he's a threat to national security. These were all socialists. They were wanted to establish friendly relations with Cuba, the Soviet Union, and therefore they were considered threats not just to, let's say, Chile's national security, they were considered threats to our national security. Well, from the very beginning of the Kennedy regime, there was enormous animosity between Kennedy and the U.S. national security establishment. You had the Bay of Pigs, where the national security establishment had planned this invasion of Cuba under the Eisenhower administration. They thought that Nixon would be elected president, who had been vice president, and instead Kennedy was. And they looked on Kennedy as a neophyte, a playboy, a guy that didn't really know what he was doing. So they set him up at the Bay of Pigs. A lot of Americans don't realize this, that they told him, we won't need air support here. We can do this just with these Cuban exiles. And Kennedy said, well, there's not going to be U.S. air support. And I said, we don't need it anyway. Well, it turns out, as the records later revealed, as they started coming out, that the CIA lied, that they figured that they would trap Kennedy, and that once these exiles were being killed on the beaches at the Bay of Pigs, that Kennedy would have no choice but to send in the air support and even an invading force to save face. Well, they didn't know John Kennedy. Kennedy said, in the midst of it, they said, well, we need the air support after all. And Kennedy said no. And so he let the thing go down in defeat. There was like 1,000 guys that were taken captive. There were 100 or so killed. And the CIA was livid. I mean, that this was a traitor. He showed weakness in the eyes of the communist threat. He didn't understand it. And Kennedy himself was livid because he knew he had been set up. And so he fires Allen Dulles. This is Allen Dulles. He was the revered head of the CIA. He fired his first assistant, who was Bissell, as well as Charles Cabell. And so the war was on. He puts Bobby Kennedy overseeing the CIA. He told aides supposedly that he was going to tear the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter them to the winds. At this point, the military gets involved, and they start exhorting Kennedy to invade Cuba. They have a program called Operation Northwoods they proposed, which was going to call for deceptive false flag attacks, terrorist attacks on American soil that were going to kill real people, and then blame it on the Cubans, which would give the excuse to invade Cuba. And Kennedy, to his everlasting credit, rejected Operation Northwoods. This is General Lemnitzer, who hated Kennedy, thought that he was a weak sister that didn't show strength in the face of the communists, wouldn't invade Cuba. This was General LeMay, again, hated Kennedy. And even after the assassination, he was talking about how bad the Kennedys were. So this war was going on big time. And Kennedy, by this time, didn't trust the military establishment or the CIA establishment at all. Well, then the Cuban Missile Crisis hits. And I mean, now they've got it over his head that if you had invaded when we told you to invade, this wouldn't have happened. We've got now nuclear missiles pointed at America here. And so they were exhorting Kennedy, now's your time to invade. Now you've got the good excuse to invade. What they didn't know was that the nuclear missiles had already been armed. They were tactical nuclear weapons. The Soviet commanders on the ground had been given battlefield authority by Nikita Khrushchev. They didn't need his approval. They could use them whenever they needed to. And so if Kennedy had followed what the CIA and the military were exhorting him to do, there is virtually no doubt that there would have been an all-out nuclear war, because those Soviet commanders would certainly have used those nuclear weapons. And so Kennedy ends up striking a deal over the vehement objections of the military. In the midst of the crisis, Bobby Kennedy tells his Soviet counterpart that he was negotiating with, he says, if you're going to strike a deal, you better strike it now, because my brother is in grave danger of a coup here. And that danger had been expressed by Eisenhower on his farewell address when he talked about the dangers of the military-industrial complex. Kennedy understood what he was up against. During his administration, he had the novel 7 Days in May made into a movie. Great movie, highly recommended, starring Burt Lancaster and Kirk Douglas and Ava Gardner, talking about the dangers of a military takeover in the U.S. And Kennedy had been instrumental in bringing that to a movie to serve as a warning. So Kennedy knew the force that he was taking on here, but he strikes a deal with the Soviets. Now, the mainstream press and the historians have always said that the Soviets blinked. They took their missiles out. That's false. It was Kennedy who blinked, and it was a good thing he did. But he said, look, we won't invade Cuba if you take your missiles out. Well, that was the reason the missiles were put in the first place. That's what Castro wanted. Just don't invade me, leave me alone. And so the Soviets remove their missiles. Kennedy doesn't invade. He also agrees to remove nuclear missiles in Turkey that were aimed at the Soviet Union. And so that resolved the crisis. But at that moment, Kennedy has this enormous breakthrough. And he realizes how close the world had come to this nuclear holocaust. And interestingly enough, Nikita Khrushchev reaches the same breakthrough. So they start negotiating. A remarkable series of negotiations through personal letters that circumvented their respective military establishments and intelligence establishments, both of whom didn't trust him. Well, Kennedy throws the gauntlet down at the military intelligence establishment. He goes and gives his commencement address at American University. Remarkable speech. You can go watch it online. You can read it. Here he doesn't consult with the CIA or the military. He just does this. And he says, the Cold War is now over. It's a racket. We don't need it. It's been a racket from the beginning. We're going to live in peaceful coexistence with the Soviets, with the communist world. Later, he proposes a joint project to the moon, which means sharing rocket technology with them. He enters into the nuclear test ban treaty over the vehement objections of the military, which had considered his deal at the Bay of Pigs to be akin to treason. And he says, it's over. We're now going to get along. And in fact, on the very day of his assassination, he has an emissary having lunch with Fidel Castro to establish friendly relations with Cuba. Well, now it's impossible to overstate the magnitude of what was happening here. I mean, this went far beyond what Mossadegh in Iran did, what Arbenz did in Guatemala, what Allende would do in Chile, what Patrice Lumumba was doing in the Congo. Lumumba, of course, they conspired to assassinate. The CIA did. Here was a U.S. president that was saying the military intelligence establishment is wrong here. This is not a big threat. The Cold War is a racket, and I'm bringing it to an end. And so you've got a huge difference in visions here. There's a critical vision in the eyes of the military intelligence establishment. This was life or death. This was a president who was effectively surrendering America to the Soviets. This was a life or death struggle here. There was no negotiations with the Soviets. One of the famous sayings during the Cold War was, you can always trust a communist to be a communist. In other words, you couldn't trust him at all. And here was Kennedy disarming, nuclear test ban treaty, no more nuclear testing in the environment. Now going to share rocket technology with the enemy. He couldn't be impeached for it. This was just a policy decision. Under our constitutional form of government, you remove a president through impeachment at this time or through election. Well, the 1964 election was around the corner, but it was clear to anybody that could see that Kennedy was going to defeat Goldwater. So if you were going to save America from this threat, there was only one possibility. It was the same avenue to save America that existed in 53 in Iran, Guatemala 54, in Cuba in the early 60s, Lumumba, the Congo in 61, 73 in Chile. The only way is to oust that president and through assassination. Now here's the Lee Harvey Oswald. So here was the official story. That Oswald, this lone nut ex-Marine communist, which never made any sense. I mean, how many Marines do you know? Here's a guy that learns fluent Russian in the military. How do you learn fluent Russian as an enlisted man? I mean, you have to practice with a tutor. You might be able to study books on the language, but Russian is a very difficult language. He gets fluent. Well, they have language schools in the military. He goes to the Soviet Union. He supposedly defects. Says he's going to give up all his secrets. And he had been stationed at Atsugi Air Base in Japan, where the top secret U-2 spy plane was, a CIA spy plane. And he says, I'm going to disclose all my secrets. So after a few years, he comes back to the United States. He's essentially given the red carpet treatment. The strange group called Traveler's Aid funds his return back. No questions asked. He's not subpoenaed before a grand jury. He's not brought before the CIA. He's not brought before Congress. This is the height of the Cold War. This is the McCarthy hearings. Remember a few years before, they went after Hollywood directors, Dalton Trumbo. They were looking for communists in Congress. Here is America's most famous self-proclaimed communist, Lee Harvey Oswald, and he's in a parallel universe. They don't touch him. They don't do anything to him. He comes back to Dallas. He goes to work for a photography firm that ironically develops top secret photographs. He goes to New Orleans. He gets a job with a right-wing owned coffee company. You know what? Right-winger's going to hire a communist. So the thesis here of those of us who have no doubts that this was a regime change operation was Oswald was a double agent. You had double agents. You recruit double agents out of the Marines. They infiltrate them into the Soviet Union to get information on living conditions there in the Soviet Union. He comes back. He keeps on with this facade that he's a communist because they're supposedly going to get him into Cuba to assassinate Castro. And at this point, they've got the plots to assassinate Castro. The CIA is partnered with the mafia. And so they set this guy up, and that's what he said. The whole time he says, I'm innocent, I'm a patsy, I've been set up here. And so they station him here, and they frame him. And that's what a patsy is, they frame him. Now, the interesting question is, and here's the $10,000 question here. If you're going to frame a guy, and in fact, this goes to the very brilliance of the assassination. And keep in mind, we're talking about some brilliant people here. The CIA these are Ivy League graduates. They were specialized in assassination. You can go online and see the assassination manual that they had as far back as 1952, where just Google assassination manual CIA and you can read it. And they were talking about how to assassinate people, never put it in writing, how to keep it covered up that this is a state-sponsored assassination. And so these are brilliant people, and they've specialized in assassination practically from the time the CIA is brought into existence, which is 1948, 1947, 48. So here they come up with a plot to frame a guy who's firing from the rear, supposedly, with shots coming from the front. Does that make any sense? I mean, if you're going to frame a guy that's supposedly firing the rear, wouldn't you want all the shots coming from the rear? Why would you have him firing from the front? And that goes to the very brilliance, the cunning brilliance of this assassination. Because you see, what they did was they operated on two levels. The one level was the World War III cover story, where Johnson gets Warren to join the Warren Commission, which he opposed because he was Chief Justice of the United States. And he said it's a conflict of interest. But he says, we're looking at the possibility of World War III here. Now, why are they looking at the World War III possibility? And Johnson tells the same thing to Senator Russell, who refused to serve because he hated Warren. Well, because there were shots fired from the front. If there's shots fired from the front and there's a communist in the rear, that means this is a communist-directed assassination. There's no other way around it. You got an avowed communist here. Who are his Confederates firing from the front? Has to be communists. Okay. So that way you get Warren to join this thing, but more important, you shut it down, because what will that lead to? It'll lead to nuclear war. What other result could there be if the communists have shot our president? That's an act of war. And so how do you go to, now ordinarily you'd say, why not go to war over this? I mean, they've shot our president. Well, because it was the CIA that had started the assassination game in the first place by trying to assassinate Castro. How do you go to war when you're the one that started this game, a war that's going to wipe out mankind? And so by developing this story that this is a communist conspiracy, they're able to shut down the investigation immediately. And that's what they did. They shut it down. They said, let's just get the guy that did the shooting, Oswald, and shut down everything. Let's go into this autopsy. Let's hide the fact that the shots were fired from the front. Let's alter the body or alter the photographs, alter the x-rays. And that way we can get this thing shut down. And therefore nobody ever discovers who really carried out this assassination. Brilliant, just absolutely brilliant. And of course, central to this is you got to assassinate Oswald, because if Oswald goes to trial, obviously he's going to say, wait a minute, this is who I really am. Which of course blows everything up. In fact, my hunch is that the plan was to assassinate him at the school book depository, and everything went awry, which is why Ruby had to later assassinate him. So now where does this leave us? Well, obviously all the people involved in this are dead. Is this just a matter of historical note? Well, partly yes, but it's an important part of our history. I say it's time for Americans to accept this part of our history. This is our legacy as a national security state, not just regime change operations in Iran, Guatemala, Chile, Iraq, Afghanistan, and a host of others, Congo, but right here in the United States. This is the monstrosity that came into existence after World War II, the national security state, a monstrosity that in its own vision of patriotism and saving America and protecting so-called national security, a stupid nebulous term that nobody's ever able to define, we end up losing one of the most cherished presidents in our history, who actually was the one that saved this country from nuclear holocaust. And so that's the ultimate lesson. And this is what the work we do at the Future of Freedom Foundation. We're a libertarian organization. We address all libertarian issues, but we focus especially on the national security state way of life. That we think this is the biggest mistake America ever made, was converting the federal government from a limited government republic to a national security state. And that's the lesson here, that Eisenhower's warnings about the dangers of a national security establishment, Kennedy's warnings with 7 days in May, are just as valid today. In fact, they were the warnings of our founding fathers. They stood against what they call standing armies, which is just a word they use for national security establishments or military intelligence establishments, because of the grave danger they pose to a democratic system. And that danger exists to this day. On that note, I'll wrap it up and open it up for questions. Oh, one more thing. Let me recommend some books before I forget. Number one book. If you haven't read JFK and the Unspeakable, Why He Died and Why It Matters, I can't recommend this book too highly. And this is, in fact, this is the book I always recommend to people that know nothing about this subject. This doesn't go delve deeply into the autopsy, but it'll give you this overall perspective of what happened here in terms of a regime change operation. Here is my book, The Kennedy Autopsy. It's our bestseller ever at FFF, the Future of Freedom Foundation. I just got notified by Amazon that they asked me for permission to have it considered for a special promotion that they're running. Of course, I gave that. This is The Kennedy Autopsy 2. It's a sequel. You've got JFK's war with the national security establishment, why Kennedy was assassinated. We just came out with a print version of that. And that's by Douglas Horn, who served on the Assassination Records Review Board. And this is my book, Regime Change, the JFK Assassination. It gives you the overall perspective of what happened here. CIA and JFK, The Secret Assassination Files by Jefferson Morley, a former reporter for the Washington Post. That's one of our books that kind of brings you up to date as to the secrecy of their files that they kept secret. Here's the real breakthrough book. This is the watershed book. This is Douglas Horn's book, Inside the Assassination Records Review Board. My books, The Kennedy Autopsy and The Kennedy Autopsy 2, are really reviews or synopsis of this book, which is 5 volumes. It's like coffee table size. This is a tough read, and you better be prepared for a tough read. A lot of technical stuff in there, but by the time you finish this 5-volume work, you will have no doubts that this is not a conspiracy theory. This is as much a fact as the regime change operations were in Iran, Guatemala, on both sides of the Kennedy assassination, Chile, Lumumba, and Congo, and so forth. Okay, on that note, open it up for some questions.
Great. Thank you, Jacob. Now, one of the things I want to kind of ask you about a little bit is the story of John Liggett and swapping the bodies and things like that. I'd like you to get into that a little bit and give your opinions and thoughts of that.
Yeah, great question. You see, obviously, if the body is being brought in secretly at 6:35 p.m. in a cheap shipping casket, somebody has removed it from the Dallas shipping casket. And then you have to put the body back in the Dallas shipping casket to have it brought in officially at 8 p.m. So it's a very sophisticated operation taking place here. Nobody really knows when the body was taken out from the time it left Parkland Hospital to the time it arrived at Andrews Air Base. All we know is that it was taken out for sure because of what the enlisted men said and all the things I cited earlier. The most likely possibility was during the time of the luggage shift, because there was no reason for luggage to be shifted from Air Force 2 to Air Force 1. And Johnson ordered that to be done. Like I said earlier, the 2 planes were duplicates of each other. They were both going back to the same place, Andrews Air Base. So you could have left the luggage there. But by bringing the luggage over and you've got the casket there, it's very easy to quickly take the body out and put it into the shipping casket and then put it into the cargo hold. That's the most likely possibility. Another possibility is while Johnson was being sworn in, because Johnson insisted on everybody coming forward, including Mrs. Kennedy. And there's a good possibility that that's when the shift took place. Now, Horn details what happened at the Bethesda morgue to get the body back into the Dallas casket in his 5-volume book. I've got that in my book as well. It's the final chapter about the Kennedy autopsy, called the Kennedy Casket Conspiracy. And in fact, David Lifton's book, Best Evidence, which is another great book I highly recommend. It was written in the 1970s, and Horn actually, I think, dedicates his book to Lifton's book, because Lifton was the one that really uncovered, the first one to start uncovering the idea of that the body was brought in earlier. And they go through this sophisticated operation after they had altered the body or created these fake, false deceptive photographs and x-rays. They go through a sophisticated operation to get the body back into the Dallas casket there at the morgue. And rather than go into the details as to how that happened, they enlisted the help of some FBI personnel there. Kellerman was involved in this. There's very little doubt that Kellerman was dirty in this whole thing. Kellerman was involved in the casket shifting back into the Dallas casket at the Bethesda morgue. He was in the passenger seat when it was driving, when Kennedy was shot. And then he was in charge of the autopsy team that would not let the autopsy, or the Secret Service team that would not let the autopsy be conducted there at Parkland Hospital.
Yeah. So as the story goes, there's this mortician in the Dallas area in Arlington, I believe, named John Liggett. And he's called away, and his family is all on record on this. In the movie, The Men Who Killed Kennedy, I believe the last episode, which wasn't allowed to air for 15 or 20 years. But you can get it now on YouTube. John Liggett did surgery on the president to alter the wounds, supposedly on Air Force One or somewhere. And there were 30 witnesses that said, even people in the autopsy room said, well, it looks like he's already been operated on. And of course, there was no operation done at Parkland Hospital. And the strange story of John Liggett is worth a presentation on its own. But there's also this theory that J.D. Tippit, whose nickname was, and one of our listeners brought this up as well, nickname was JFK because they said all his friends and cohorts at the police department said he looked up like him, was in a sense possibly even swapped for the president, for particularly the autopsy photos that didn't match up with the testimony of the Parkland Hospital doctors. So any comments on all of that?
Yeah, I have to challenge the first part about Liggett. That's just not true at all.
Okay.
That they bring in the Dallas casket. They order it from a casket funeral home there in Dallas. They bring it over. It's a beautiful, very expensive casket. They immediately take it to Air Force One. There's no delay in that at all. So there's no surgery at all being conducted on the way to Parkland. On the way to Love Field. And then there's no delay between the casket arriving and Air Force One taking off. Now, one could speculate that when the body is down in the cargo hold, that there's some surgery taking place there. Obviously possible, but Horn details very carefully. And like I say, Horn served on the Assassination Records Review Board. There's very few people that know that this stuff backwards and forwards as well as Horn. That when the body gets to Andrews, it's already been shifted and there's a helicopter there. And you can see the helicopter lights in the video. And they put the casket on that helicopter, and that's the reason for getting it there. And they drive it there in a black hearse. This is what the enlisted men said, that men in suits were in this hearse with the casket, the shipping casket, and then the Boyagin's team carries it inside. That's the reason for the body arriving early, the hour and a half. What they were doing was doing surgery there, either to mask the back of the head wound and then cover it up with scalp, doing a very professional job to hide this. And then, of course, the magic bullet theory, not not dissecting the neck and so forth. They were doing everything they could. Humes, Boswell, and Fink. That's where the surgery took place, or the fake photography took place. Not real clear, but that's the most logical place where the alterations were taking place. That's the hour and a half. And if you look at what they were at, the testimony of what they were doing and so forth, you see all kinds of anomalies. Another fascinating aspect to this is a guy named Robert Knudsen. Now, Knudsen is the official White House photographer. Great guy. He'd been the photographer for the White House for years and years, many presidents. I mean, this guy was probably like in his 60s or 70s. He had served many presidents. He, on the day of the assassination, he is summoned to come and photograph the autopsy. And everything's top secret. His family said he was away the whole weekend. He comes back and he tells his family, I can't talk about what I saw, but he later tells them there were some real shenanigans going on. But he says, I was the photographer for the autopsy. And he later tells a photography magazine, national magazine, I think it was in the 70s or so, I was the official photographer. And he goes to his grave telling his family there was some shady stuff going on here. Well, everybody agrees that Knudsen was not at the autopsy. And yet, if Knudsen's telling the truth, which clearly he was, why would he lie? This guy's a White House photographer. He was photographing something else that wasn't the Kennedy autopsy, but being led to believe that this was the autopsy. So in other words, there's a lot of shenanigans going on here, but I think all the shenanigans take place at Bethesda, and they did not take place beforehand.
And he was, if I'm mistaken, he died under mysterious circumstances, and then those photos, his home was ransacked and they stole the photos. Is that correct? You remember that?
No, I'm not familiar with that.
I'm pretty sure. I think I bet maybe not a steak dinner, but a hamburger on it.
You may be thinking about another guy that supposedly videotaped it, and he had photographs in his possession where somebody had witnessed, and I forget what that guy's name. He was a Navy guy, and he dies supposedly from a suicide, and I think the gun was in the wrong hand. I think he was left-handed, and the gun was in his right hand or something like that. And they never found his photographs that people had seen, or his videotape. So I think that may have been what you were referring to.
Well, maybe. I know one of them. I know one. There was somebody that had the original photographs, and that had happened to. And if I remember correctly, this is a little bit shady. I mean, it's been a few years since I read it. Of course, the theory, you take one body in the shipping in one casket, via helicopter to Bethesda, and then you slowly drive the other casket there. And I think there was some discussion about the trip in the car was very slow and a very circuitous route, if I remember correctly.
That may be. I mean, they were obviously just taking their time. There were people along the route grieving, of course. And then when they get there, they take their sweet time leaving the car parked out in front for obvious reasons. I mean, nobody could figure out, why is it just parked there? Why is it just parked there? Well, it was just parked there because the casket was empty. They were having to alter the body or create these fake photographs and x-rays, and then figure out how to get the body secretly back into the Dallas casket so that everything looks on the up and up. And so there's this famous chase scene where the vehicle with the casket just takes off, and they've got the color guard that's ready to carry the casket in. They don't know what's going on. They start chasing it, and this is in the dead of night. And so the one with the casket finally loses them, and they circle around to the morgue, get the body into the casket, and then go back to the front again, where the color guard's saying, hey, where'd you guys go? And then it's the color guard that carries the body in at 8. A lot of strange shenanigans going on. But you see, nothing can be perfectly planned, Dory, as you know. Any military operation, there's going to be flaws in it. No matter how well you plan, things are going to go wrong.
Well,
things went wrong.
It's too big a deal, and it definitely went wrong. I read something recently where someone had, identified, this commanding officer that told Dr. Fink not to dissect the throat, and that it was actually General LeMay, which would make perfect sense because he probably hated Kennedy the most of anyone on the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I'm going to do some more research and see if we can confirm that, because I've only seen that from one spot. So,
well, LeMay was most likely there. It's not been established. He was off doing something in Canada or something, fishing or whatever, and then so he gets notice of the assassination. So he comes, and he doesn't say that he was at the autopsy, but there were people saying there was a Air Force or Army general there, Air Force general with a big cigar in the front row. And that they has all the earmarks of LeMay. And you almost got the feeling that LeMay was there gloating that, hey, we won, we beat you. You didn't beat us.
Yeah, it's pretty sickening. Hey, here's another question. Another question is, what about the destroying of the first notes of the autopsy?
Oh, yeah. Strange stuff. I mean, here is the president's autopsy. So you would think they're going to keep records of everything. Well, but they're building things on the fly here. When they're drawing up their autopsy report, and this was Commander Humes, it was drawing up the autopsy report. He had his notes, and he ends up destroying all his notes and destroying the first copy of the autopsy report, because you see they had to figure out how to make these bullets work. And so the report is evolving. So when they later ask Humes, why did you destroy your notes? And he says, well, because they had blood on them. And I knew that this was going to be really morbid, and they would go down in history with these blood on them. And I didn't want to embarrass the Kennedys. And they said, well, here's some other documents that have the blood on them, the autopsy report or whatever. There were other stuff there that they didn't destroy. Why didn't you destroy that? Well, Hughes didn't have a good explanation for that. He says, well, I don't know. But clearly the reason they were destroying them was because they had information there that was inconsistent. You brought it up, Dory, in your remarks about, the original bullet from the back, and it was pretty clear that Kennedy, this was a classic military ambush. He was being hit by both the front and the back, and the bullet in the back was in the right shoulder. And there's an autopsy photograph of a little diagram of a human being showing the bullets in the shoulder. Well, as your little diagram of what happened, the bullet has to move up to the neck. And that's where that's the magic bullet.
Pretty hard to do when it's coming down at an angle.
Exactly. And and then, it comes out in this pristine, just perfectly formed bullet, even though it's hit all these bones and stuff, which cannot be done. Well, this was the magic bullet. And this is what they had to work with. They had to make this thing work. It was like trying to pound a square peg into a round hole.
Well, I really appreciate you coming today. I don't think we have any more questions. I can visit with you. Next time you're in Dallas, let me know. I'd love to buy you dinner or something. I think our last correspondence, we were discussing the Bay of Pigs, and I can't remember what question is, but I did some research and I came up with the answers I was looking for. So I need to share that with you regarding the Bay of Pigs on when they canceled the order and what all happened, exactly why Kennedy got mad and why he felt like he was being set up by Dulles and Bizzle and General Charles Cabell, and of course fired all three of them. So anyway, thanks for coming. Well, it looks like we got just a congratulations, somebody saying great presentation. So thanks again, Jacob, and I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you, all of you, for attending. Tomorrow, again, we are having something that no one else has ever seen, which is the preview of the exhibit to be done over in the county records building, the old county records building, which is now going to be the University of North Texas Law School. And they're going to have this exhibit of what happened, and they call it the aftermath. And so we'll have a nice video and presentation from Margaret Lee and Kate Sutton Johnson on that. And of course, Jacob, you're certainly welcome to attend as well.
Thank you, Doug. Dory, if I could say, I invite everybody to come and visit us at the Future of Freedom Foundation, FFF.org. We have a 30 years worth of articles from a libertarian perspective, videos, conferences, and we have an FFF daily that's free for the asking, monthly journal that we've published for 30 years, and and a weekly internet show that I do with a colleague that teaches economics at the Citadel. So invite everybody to come see us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've read some of Jacob's books, highly recommend them again. So if you didn't get that down or something, email me and I'll tell you, you know, about them, or hook you up with Jacob, or get you on Amazon or whatever to order those books.
Sounds good. Thank you, Dory.
Sounds good. Have a good day. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
See you tomorrow.